All right, so we have really one goal for today, and that is to get to where we're able to effectively write data, modify data in a database through VBA. So there's a file to download for today. So go ahead and download actually these two files, worklog.accdb, that's an access database, and then dbwrite.xlsm, which will be the Excel workbook that we start with. Now, let me kind of give you while you're getting those downloaded, I'm just going to go to this online query page. In fact, let me I'm going to copy this query from our code just so I can get it to execute here. So the link from our blog page today, this online query link, will take you to just this interface. I think we've played with this once before, and I'm going to insert a query. I'm going to insert a record and then execute these. That'll give us one record to talk about down here in the event, in this event table. So the context here, the idea is, let's see, query font. What we'll be developing is this. Suppose that you are somehow involved with hiring people at the company, and an important part of your company is Excel skills. You want to know that these folks can use Excel and be able to use Excel well. How many of you have applied for a job where they gave you a worksheet and said you accomplished something with this worksheet in Excel? So looks like only folks in this column. Why is it only the folks on this side of the class that have done that? It's like half of you. Interesting. So you two apply to the same company. So I guess that makes sense. So it's something it's not like it happens on every interview, but it's getting more and more common to do that. But let's suppose that we weren't just interested in what the applicant came up with at the end, but we are interested in kind of seeing the whole process about how they did it. We want to kind of keep track and see every single cell that they modify. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to build into a worksheet something that will log every time a cell gets changed, and we'll write that change off to an external database. Now, we're going to initially do that so we write to a database in the cloud, but then the one that we actually work on and have you develop will be writing to a database just locally on your machine, to an access database. And the reason is that that's the project. The project is going to have you reading data out of Excel workbooks and writing it into an access database. And so I want to get you kind of wired up for success on a project as well, even though I think this one makes a little more sense to have the repository be somewhere, that's not under the control of the applicant, so out there in the cloud. And so the idea here is that every time the user makes a change to a cell, we want to log it. So we want to know the time that change happened. We want to know who the user is that's making that change, what workbook they're changing, what sheet they're on, which address they're changing, what the formula is in that cell, and we want to know what the value, based on everything that's in the workbook at the time, how does that formula evaluate? And we want to make that happen. Every time they change a cell, just send off the information to request that log entry be recorded. And so I think there's another table here that we won't be using, but there's a list of applicants that are working here. And then this is what we're going to try to implement. And so let's just go ahead and get the module open for this example. Now, the very first sub-procedure we have here, one that I think we've done before, but it's just basically saying, listen, while we're doing development here, we're going to be, for this record edit, which is the main one we'll be working on, we're going to be passing in a worksheet and a range. And so we can't just run this one directly. So it'd be nice to have some procedure that while we're doing the development on this, that we can run it pretty easily, which is why I made this alphabetically smaller than the other procedures here. So that when I'm on this one, hit F5, they'll say you can't possibly run this one because it has parameters. So you can't run this one directly. And I want that one then to be the one that comes up as default. So that's why it starts with an A and no other one does. Now, ultimately, we are going to make this code be executed by the very fact that someone has changed a cell. You're used to working with event-driven programming because we've done experience on working with forms. And the way forms work, you really have to think about events, objects receiving events to know when code's going to get triggered. But there are several other places that we can have code, events trigger code in Excel. And one of them is just at the workbook level, we can say anytime a cell gets changed anywhere in this whole workbook, execute code. And so we'll do that kind of towards the end. Once we get this working in this environment, then we'll hook that up to make it happen automatically. This then is going to require us to be able to have the ADODB library. Now, I think we made a link to this last time we were together, but this is a new workbook, and so we're going to have to add that reference in again. I certainly could have done the reference before I gave you the workbook, but I think it's healthy to kind of see that reference be made. So let's go ahead and do that first. So for this code to be able to run down here in this record edit, the one that we're working on, we're going to create a reference. So tools, references. And then we got to go find the Microsoft ActiveX ADODB library. And the truth is, there's a bunch of these, version 2.0 up to 6.1. We'll choose 6.1, but I think any of these would work for what we're doing today. And the truth is, I have no idea what the difference is between them, except some are newer than others, apparently by their release number. So they must have more functionality. I don't know what they are. Once we've added that reference, then we should be able to run this. Let's just take a look at what this code is doing. So we have a connection object, which we have a variable referring to it, just called CN, a connection string, and SQL. So our connection string is just going to be the text that we need to be able to get connected to this database out there in the cloud. We have then another connection string that's wired up for Microsoft Access. So this is going to be the one that's going to be looking for that workbook in the same folder as wherever looking for that Access database in the same folder where your workbook is. We're going to take a closer look at that here in just a minute. We're then going to use that connection string to open a connection. And then we're going to establish SQL. And right now, we're printing that SQL out and we're executing the SQL. So I think this will actually go and enter a record. I'm going to do one thing so I'll know that it's my code. Instead of kworthen as the username, I'm going to put my username in there. Yes. And I should now be able to run this. Now, if this succeeds, then it'll be pretty uninteresting here in VBA because we won't see anything happen, but we should be able to see other records now show up back over here on the website that we're using to view these. So we'll get rid of that. Let's just go ahead and run this. So we'll press F5 and run that Acme sub runner. Ooh, login failed. I reworked this to make sure that that login would work. Let me just check this username here. Oh, I think I didn't update the user ID. This has to be gov_VBA. Let's try that again. There we go. And I'll press F5 to finish running that. So yeah, there is one change that we had to make here. It's the update the username, the password should be the same. And now if I come back here and execute this, then we've got several others have executed. So a few other people have executed with kworthen. Several of you put my name in. No one else put your own name in there. That's kind of interesting. But the whole point is that we got the code to execute okay, and we can see that it's actually pushing the data then up there to SQL Server. So let's take a look then at this statement and just kind of understand what this statement is saying. I'm going to go ahead and bring it back here into my web interface. So this is the insert statement. So last time we played with the select statement. Select is used for pulling data out of a relational database management system. Insert is used for inserting data into the relational database management system. And so the syntax is this: insert into and then the name of a table. So we've got a table called work log, which is why when we say select star from work log, we're getting that same data back. We then have a comma separated list of the names of the columns that we want to insert data into. If I wanted to insert data into just one of these, then I'll just do that. Let me go ahead and do just, why don't we say just the username? So I'm getting rid of all of these other field names, and then I'm going to come in and have just one username included. And this one I'll call the super user. And I'm truncating at 10 rows. So let me order by event ID in descending order. And so here then is the super, you can see that super user is entered in. So the point is that whatever field I want to insert data into, and by the way, the system is set up to automatically generate a new event ID. So I don't tell it an event ID. It's automatically set up to record the current time when I make a new record. So I don't have to specify the time. It's just the rest of these ones that I'm going to specify information for. And so I'm specifying information here. It makes a new record, pulls in the default for the time, and then gets the next value for the event ID. But the point is, whatever columns I'm going to specify here, I've got to put a value for in the values clause of the insert statement. So if I change this to GLN3, then you can just see then this is a string. Now, interesting thing in structured query language is that strings are delimited by single quotes, whereas in VBA, strings are delimited by double quotes. It's just a difference in the syntax, right? So this is actually, a statement that's going to get parsed and interpreted just the same way that a VBA statement. Anytime I write a statement in VBA, the VBA interpreter has to figure out what I mean by that and go do it. Same thing happens here, right? We've got to pass this statement to the database engine, which is then going to parse it. It's a different language, it's structured query language, but it has to figure out what I mean by that and then actually accomplish the task I've told it to do. And so some differences here, strings are delimited by single quotes. And cell value. And I think if I have a numeric literal, I don't have to put quotes around it. So this should work okay, though I haven't tried that. Change that to like 400. Yeah. And so just as in VBA, I need quotes around my string literals, but I do not put quotes around numeric literals. The same thing is in structured query language. So, we're not, diving in and learning structured query language fully, but enough to be able to insert data. That's what we're after here today. Any questions on the insert statement in structured query language? Show me how comfortable you feel with the structured query language insert statement. 5, 5, 4, 5, 5, 5, 4. Okay. All right. So now our task then is going to be to, how do we dynamically build this insert statement so that it gets the right information plugged in? So at this point, why don't we go ahead and convert over to our Access database. I'm going to comment out the connection for SQL Server and uncomment the connection for Microsoft Access. Now, the important thing here is that we've downloaded that Access database, and it must be in the same location as the workbook that we're working on, because as we build the connection string for this Access database, part of that is the path to where that database is located. And we are reading the current path off the workbook that we're working on. So this code assumes that that workbook is in the same location. You'll do something similar in the next project, the project for modifying databases. It won't be the same workbook, but it'll be based on, it won't be the same folder as the workbook is in, but it'll be based on that. So this is going to get you headed in the right direction. I'm going to go ahead and open up that database. Has been blocked macros because untrusted. I've got to do the same thing on this Access database that I have to do on an Excel workbook when I've downloaded it from the web. So just go through that process, right click this and choose properties and unblock. By the way, if you're using Mac and trying to run this, in Mac, this code will not run in Mac because we are in the Mac version of Excel because we are using objects that are only available on Windows to access the database. Enable content. So here's a work log. It's the same structure as the table that we have out there in the cloud on SQL Server. But it's just here. And that's one of the really neat things about the way that working with databases is once we get that connection made, the rest of the code is going to be the same. So once I get this code working, I could flip this back and forth between the local database and the remote database without having to change any other line of code except the connection string that's getting me connected onto that database. Okay, so now that so the really only change I've made here is just change the connection string. I'd really like to run this and then see that that record goes into the work log as well. So go ahead and just run this again. It looks like it ran without error. I'll open up my work log and I can see that I've got that record that's come into this database here as well. Now, if I already had the work log table open, I'll just run it again. That table is not going to update. So unless I do something to tell it to refresh, it seems like if I just tell it to sort, I think it would refresh. Yeah, so if I click on the sort button here, that would cause it to refresh. Almost seems like there should be some kind of a refresh button here, but I don't see where. Oh, here it is. Refresh all would do it right here. So that's something that will feel a little bit uncomfortable, is that although the data has gone to the database, you won't see it until you either close and reopen that table or hit the refresh. I'll run that one more time and then just hit that refresh and make sure it comes in. There we go. And of course, now that's located on my machine. So as you make changes, you'll change your database. No one else will put records into your database. I'll only be going into my database. Questions? Yes.
Do you do anything besides just commenting down this server and then
So the question is, did I do anything besides disabling this one and enabling this one? And the only other thing I did was I downloaded that Access database. So you've got the database there located in the same folder as your workbook?
Yeah.
And is it giving you an error?
Oh, never mind. It worked.
So, but there may be someone else that has the same issue. What was the problem?
I was on the table.
Oh, you'd opened up the applicant table. Yeah, so there's just some personal information in there, and then the work log is where we should be putting the data. Now, but some of you are getting an error.
Yeah, I'm getting it out of valid file name. It's sending me highlighting the line cn.opens. Yes.
Yeah, okay, so the error is not a valid file name. And so it's trying to open, so this is calling the open method the connection object, and it's trying to open it with this connection string. So I'm almost positive that means that this database is not in the same folder as the workbook, but let's just take a look. Because I mean, it's saying that's not it's not able to find that file.
Yeah. Right here. Maybe it's something because I'm on cloud.
Oh yeah, and if you are, you've got, this is going to have to be on your local machine. So if you've got this in, if this is saved on OneDrive, that's going to be a problem. So just make sure that if you ask for what the path of the current workbook, make sure that it starts with a drive letter and a colon rather than http:// because that's going to be very confusing to VBA. Yes.
So like when I'm downloading, I put it in the OneDrive folder, but now like this, it's not good.
So when you do, so the question is, where is your workbook? Is your workbook on the desktop as well?
Yeah. But I put the workbook in, it's weird. This what happened the last time.
Oh, really? But you figured it out by re-downloading?
It's like, I swear, I put it in OneDrive folder and it stays there.
Interesting. Yeah, Microsoft does a lot to try to get you to put stuff in the OneDrive folder, even if you don't want to. So yeah, give that a go. Other questions? Okay, so our next task then is to get to where we're building this structured query language statement correctly. So this seems a little bit strange, right? So we are now using VBA to write a statement in a different language and then send that statement off to be processed. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and just kind of work through these in order. So the first one is the username. I'm trying to remember how to get to the username. I just don't remember how to do it. So quick pop over here to Google. So VBA, get current logged in username. Get the username, VBA. It's really quite simple if you remember how to do it. Oh, application.username. Let's just see if that's right. Yeah, that's not the username. That's the name of the logged in user, which would be fine, actually. This might be the one I was thinking of. Yeah, so this expression in VBA will give me the Windows username that you're logged in with. Application.username will give you the name of the actual name of the user. Either one of those would do the trick. So, how am I going to do this? So here's the way I think I would do it. Now, I could just kind of embed everything into this one statement to get, instead of having these string literals as a part of this, to have them be coded. But let's do it this way instead. Let me come in here, and I'm going to change this gallen2. I'm going to change that to be just some text that I can reliably replace. So, and I've done it by putting it inside of angle brackets. The angle bracket is just to make sure I don't kind of bump into that text kind of accidentally in the query. Because now what I've done is I've changed this query string into a template that I'm going to now start replacing the individual components with the value I actually want to put in there. So now I'm starting off with my SQL being this, and now let me just modify it. I'm just going to change what SQL is. SQL equals the replace function. I'm going to say, look at SQL, look for something, replace it with something. What I want to look for? I want to look for that tag that I just put in. And I want to replace it with, let me go ahead and replace it with application.username. And so now that should have taken out this tag and replaced it with whatever this evaluates to. So when I run this now, I should see that gov.allen now is what's in the string. And that should have then gone into my database as well. Trying to zoom in here and access, and I don't know if access is zoom inable at all. That's kind of amazing. Okay, now how is this working? I'm passing in a reference to a worksheet and to a range. So the next one here, oh, this is just the name of the workbook. So let's just go ahead and edit that one. W-O-R-K, book. And then I'll have another statement similar to this. but we'll just read the current name of the workbook from this workbook object. Passing in a sheet as a reference is SH. I'll do the same thing for my sheet name as well. So when I'm calling this procedure, I am sending it in SH. So if I look to my runner here, it's just passing in the active sheet. It takes the name of SH, so that's how I'm going to read the name of that sheet. I'll go ahead and run this again and just make sure that that code's working. Kind of go in baby steps here. And refresh. Yeah, so now we actually do have it bringing in the name of the worksheet as well as, that's the same sheet name that I must have had hard coded in there. So let me just go ahead and change that to sheet 2. Run it again. Yeah, so now I'm reading sheet 2 there as that name. So this is the process of, building that insert statement out the way that I want it to go. We'll do a few more here, and then we'll start dealing with cases that are going to end up being a problem and seeing how we work around them. Questions? Okay, so I'm passing in a range called target. So let's do the same thing here for my cell address. I'll just call that address. And that's going to be target.address. Will be the formula here. And then a value. Now, I think before I run this, I better go put a formula somewhere on my worksheet. So it'll be here on sheet 2. Give myself a sum of those numbers. Okay, so I've actually given myself a formula that will have it'll have a formula and it will have a value. I want to see that information then get recorded in my log. So I'll run this. And then take a look at the log. Yeah, it looks, did I do it with the formula all times? Oh, I didn't update the value. So I put the formula in twice, which is exactly what it did. Put the formula for the formula, and then it put the formula for the value as well. So I've updated that now to replace the value tag with the actual value. And yeah, that looks better. So we've got the cell that we're on, the formula that cell has, then the value. We're getting the timestamp. We know who's doing it, what workbook they're working on, sheet, and so forth. Questions? Okay, so the next thing I'd like to do in this example is I would like to get this actually logging. I'm going to actually have it make the change when we change the cell. And so this is going to be the first time that we've used these Well, we'll use this workbook object here. When I double click this, it's going to actually open up a module that's built into the workbook itself. It's a workbook level module. Normally, we create a module by saying insert module, and those are what we refer to as general code modules. But the module that's already built into the workbook is a special module. I'm going to double click it to open it up. The reason it's special is because it allows us to react to when different objects receive different events. And so right up here from this drop-down list that's at the top of my module, I'm going to drop that down and choose the workbook. So now we're going to say, and it defaults, it says, oh, you want to run something when the workbook opens. No, I don't want to run it when the workbook opens, but I could, right? This could be whatever code gets here, when that workbook first opens up, as soon as macros are disabled, that code will run. That's not the one I want. I'm going to choose, whoops, I guess I got to change that first. I'm going to choose to a different event. Instead of open, I got to find one when a value changes on a sheet. And there's an event called sheet change right there. I think that's the one I want. Yeah, because it is getting passed into it a worksheet that's being changed and the range that's being changed. So I'm just going to go ahead and just do a debug.print here of my sh.name and my target.address. Now, this is an event subprocedure. So anytime the workbook object receives the sheet change event, it should trigger that code. So let's just see if I can get to where I can see both of these at the same time. And the very fact that I'm changing that cell is causing that code to execute. So now I would just like to have this procedure, whenever this happens, I want to call my procedure that does the logging. And I think, I forgot what it was called. I'll go take a look. So it's called record edit, and it's expecting to have passed to it a worksheet and a range. So back to my workbook, instead of printing this, I'm going to record edit, not pass the name of the sheet, but pass the whole sheet, not pass the address of the range, pass the whole address. So now each time I make a change to any sheet on the workbook, it should record that. It should try to record that by calling my record edit, which should push it to whichever database I'm connected up to. So I'm going to give it a shot. Looks like it executed without error. I should have a value of ASDF now in my database. And there's the change that we just made. Questions? Is anyone saying I need just another minute to get this code hooked up? Can you start to see why whenever you open up a workbook that has macros in it, Excel is like, oh, are you really sure you want to do this? Like, yeah, could we have code here that's like taking information out of that workbook and sending it off to a remote server somewhere? Yeah, and like no, not really any indication that that's happening. Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff. And can be abused, and in fact has been abused, which is the whole reason they have to have all that whole security thing happening. Okay, now let's make a mistake, or let's do something that's going to cause an error and see if we can understand what the error is. So let's just put in, let's say we're dealing with someone's name. We'll do first name and last name. Let's say we've just got Patrick O'Rourke. I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to cause an error. I'm going to hit debug. So it has an error right when it tries to execute this. In fact, what was the error? Did it say the error? Syntax missing operator in query expression O'Rourke. That's not a very helpful message if you're just starting at this stuff. But let's take a look at the statement that got printed here. Should be this one right here. Yeah. Okay, so for a moment, let's just pretend that we're the structured query language interpreter that's running in Microsoft Access, trying to figure out what to do with this insert statement that we just dropped in here. I'm going to come on, I'm going to break this onto 2 lines just so I can see it a little bit better. So it gets here, it finds the first word and it goes insert. It goes, great, I know what that means, the insert statement. And it's probably thinking at that time, I bet the next word is going to be into, because that's the only thing I'm expecting after the word insert. It gets to this word into and goes, great, just what I was expecting. It gets to this word and it goes, I'm expecting that to be a table name. Let me check and make sure that really is a table name. It looks in its database and goes, yep, we've got a table called work log. That's great. It says the next thing either better be the word values or it better be an open parenthesis. That's the only 2 things that are legal at this point. And it says, yep, open parenthesis. And it gets the next thing up to the comma and it goes, that better be a field name in the table called work log. And it checks to make sure that that's right. And it goes, yep. It does the same thing with all the rest of these. It goes, yep, that's a column, that's a column, that's a column, that's a column. If one of those was didn't identify something that wasn't a column inside that table, it would be an error. So I don't know what to do with this. Like the only thing that's legal here is going to be a list of column names from whatever table you specified here. Wonderful. After this, we could have, there's some other things that we could do. Values is one of the ways that we put values into a table. But it gets to the word values and goes, great, I'm expecting that. It says, yep, I'm expecting a parenthesis. And then it says, all right, single quote. And it goes string literal. I got it. I'm going to keep reading until I find another quote. And so it reads in all these characters and goes, great, I'm actually just trying to put in that value. It gets to that closing quote or that second quote and it goes, that's the end of the string literal. It says, I dearly hope the next thing is a comma because that's the only thing that's legal to be next. And it gets to the comma and it goes, great. It now knows the value that's going to go into the username column of that database. It's now expecting these values to line up for the rest of the ones that we've got here. Now let's look at what happens when it gets to this one right here. It gets here and it says single quote, perfect. I'm starting a new string literal. It gets to that one and it goes, okay, the first character in the string literal is capital O. It gets to that and what does it say? What does it see? It goes, it's the end of the string. What is it expecting next? Comma is the only legal thing next. And what is there? It's an R. And it's like, oh man, I don't know what to do. In fact, what does it say? It says syntax error, missing operator in query expression. I don't know why it's a missing operator. I guess because it was expecting to have a comma next. Is a comma an operator? I don't know. What's the solution? Incidentally, the solution is exactly the same as it is in VBA. I'm not sure we've talked about this in VBA yet. We can have the same problem here. Let's just say I'm going to print something like, this is a quote character. And I'm going to try to put a quote. Like this is the string I'm trying to print out. But we have the same problem here. Because the double quote is used to terminate the string or to delimit the string, it gets to that and it goes, oh, that's the end of the string. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen here. I'm hoping it's going to give me an error. Yeah, good. Now, both Visual Basic, both basic, the language basic and structured query language were made in the 1970s. Was BASIC before the 1970s? I don't think so. I think BASIC is a language of the 70s. And they actually solved this problem the same way in both of these languages. And it's not a common way to solve it anymore. But here's how you do it. So the idea is, if you want to put a quote inside a quote terminated string, then you put 2 of them side by side. I don't think that's a really good solution, but it was the 1970s. Now what the interpreter really does is goes, quote, beginning of a string. And it comes along here and it goes, okay, characters in the string, characters in the string, characters in the string. This looks great. Characters in the string, characters in the string. Oh, that's the end of the string, I think. But let me just peek at the next character. And if the next character is also a quote, it's not the end of the string. It's just a quote inside the string. And it looks there and goes, oh, it was two quotes right next to each other. That's really just a quote inside the string. And so it goes, great, there's a quote in the string. And then it goes character in the string, character in the string. And it goes, I think that's the end of the string. Let me just check and see if there's another quote. It looks over it and goes, there's no other quote. So that's right. It's actually going to print that quote. We've got to do the same thing in structured query language. So we replace the single quote with two single quotes. Now, out of all of these, let's go ahead and do it here in, we'll do it on the formula and the value together for now, because it's gonna end up being exactly the same thing, which will be a problem. Actually, let's do it this way, just to simplify things. See, let me stop my code, clear out my immediate window. I'm going to put a different formula in here. I'm just going to check. I think it's character number 39. Yeah, character number 39 is a single quote. And so I can get a single quote here by typing in code 39. So if I want to take the numeric expression of a number from the ASCII table and put it into a cell, it's code 39. Well, this is going to trigger my code to execute. And the formula doesn't have a single quote in it, but the value should have a single quote. So I'm expecting this to fail. Oh no, it's not 39. What's the code for 39? What did that do? 51? Maybe it's char. Maybe I did that backwards. There we go. Yeah, so code is going the other way. Code is taking the string representation and asking for the numeric representation. Char, C-H-A-R, is taking the numeric representation and asking for the string representation. So we can see then that the problem here is that I've got now quote, quote, quote. I've got three single quotes in a row. And that's confusing. It would be okay if I had another quote in there, right? I need to make that look like this. So I've got two quotes side by side inside the quotes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, listen, whatever the value is, I want to find every occurrence of a single quote and replace it with what? Two single quotes. So I'll just write the replace function right around this one. Okay, so I've got my replace. I'm looking for something. I'm replacing it with something. This is going to look pretty ugly as well. I'm looking for a single quote. That is a double quote terminated string with only a single quote in it. I think rather than that, I think I'd like it better to see it this way. Char 39. So it's so in VBA, it's CHR. In the formula, it's CHAR. And I want to replace that with two CHRs right next to each other, or two character number 39s right next to each other. So I'm just going to concatenate them together. I don't know. Is it better with a quote, quote, double quote, single quote, double quote? It's just pretty hard to see, especially with the font that I'm using here. So now I'm going to go ahead and stop this code and try that again. I'll just edit this and enter. And now that executes without an error. Come back and check at my code here. F5. And yeah, so now I've successfully put it in that single quote. I should be able to get in. I really can't get my O'Rourke yet because I'm going to have to do that same trick on the formula. So I'm going to go ahead and put that same replace here for the formula, target.formula. And now if I just type in something with a single quote in it, it should take that as well. So now that goes in without error also. And so that's kind of the biggest gotcha here, is when you have to embed a single quote into a string literal in structured query language, you've got to double them up. And so, we don't know what we're going to find in the worksheet, but if we've got a cell that's got that single quote in it, we've got to double it up. Now, what happens to this if there isn't a single quote? And I say replace every occurrence of a single quote here. What if there is none? Well, there's no change. So I don't have to look at it and say, if there is a single quote, do this to it. I can just say, replace all the single quotes with 2 single quotes. And if there's none, then it'll make no change at all. So that should be okay. Questions here? There's another thing we have to deal with, and that is blank values in databases are a little bit confusing. So let's take a look real quick at this. Let me come back just to my my web version of this. So I'm going to insert in here for my value here, I'm going to insert a 0-length string. So quote, quote, an empty string. And I'll submit that. And I should get, then get that showing here. That looks okay. And now let me ask for only those where the cell value is a 0-length string. Cell value equals quote, quote. And I'm going to disable my inserting here for a moment. Hyphen, hyphen does a line comment in structured query language. Where, sorry, the order by needs to come after the where clause. So I start from work log where cell value equal that, and then my order by. That looks just fine. So I've got 55, 56, 57, 58. Now, the problem is that is not the absence of a value. That is a 0-length string. And that is a problem. Because in the world of database management, the way I ask to see something where there's no value is this. Instead of saying where the value is equal to a 0-length string, I say where the value is null. So null is a key word in structured query language that means the absence of a value. And so here, I forgot which numbers I had before. So let me go where the value equals 0-length string. It's 55 through 61. Change this to null. So 55, is 55 here? It's not. Now it looks like, let me go, I'm going to bring both of those queries in here so I can see them side by side. $55, $56, $57, $58. 59 is missing from this set, but 59 is over here. Now, a 0-length string is invisible. It's a string with no characters in it. By the way, in VBA, how many bytes of memory does it take to store a 0-length string? I don't know why you remember this. We talked about it like on the second day of class. There are 4 bytes of overhead in a string for string variables. The first 4 bytes say how long the string is, and then it takes 1 byte per character to show the string. And so it takes 4 bytes to store 0 characters because it takes those 4 bytes to say there are no characters in the string. So you see why that's different than the absence of value. It takes 4 bytes to record a 0-length string, whereas the absence of a value is just no value at all. And so this is a really important concept in relational database management, because the way I ask for when a value is missing is with this keyword null. Now, I cannot say equals null, because null really means one or two things. It either means there is no value, or it means we don't know what the value is. And so equals null is like nothing is equal to null. I don't even think null is equal to null. Like if I ask if null is equal to null, it goes no, because we don't know what those values are. I can't say that they're equal to each other. And so it's got this keyword is null. So anytime we've got a 0-length string, we've got to convert that to the value null. There's actually 2 options that I could do. I could here, instead of inserting this, I could use the keyword null, which says, you know what? I know I told you I wanted to put in something for the cell value, but really don't do it. Right? There's no value to put in there. That's one option I have. The other option is to just not include that one. And then I don't have to supply a value here. But if I say cell value here, it's expecting me to give it a cell value. I can kind of back away from that later and say, oh, you know what? I know I told you I was going to put a value in for cell value, but I decided against it. And so I'm giving them the keyword null here. Okay, so this is kind of 2 ways that I can get at this. Let me change this from GLN3 to GLN4. On both of these, and then only look for the ones that it actually is null. And we'll see that those are going to show up now with the null value. Right, so these are coming in because I'm saying, show me the ones that have no value, for the cell value. So my trick now is that I've got to look for that occasion in when I'm making the structured query language insert statement, and I've got to adapt it to do this way, because the way I'm currently doing it, it's putting in a 0-length string when I should be putting in null. So what are the places that actually, oh, you know what, before we do that, let's kind of finish off where we're going to have to deal with this single quote issue. Am I ever going to have an address with a single quote in it? I don't think there's a legal address that's got a single quote. Could I have a sheet name with a single quote? I don't think that's allowed in a sheet name, because he actually used a single quote to identify, like if you've got a space in VBA, you put single quotes around the sheet name if you've got a space in it. So I don't think that's legal. Oh, that is legal. So what happens if I change this? I should get an error. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have to do that same thing here. In fact, this is getting kind of ugly. So I think what I want to do is this. Let's make another function here called prep SQL. We're going to pass it data as a string. And it's going to return a string. And for right now, let's just send back, let's just replace the quotes and send it back. So prep SQL equals looking at data. So I think this is going to make our code quite a bit more readable. So all this does, maybe even deserves a comment. Replace single quote with 2 single quotes. So it looks like I've got to do that same thing for our target. No, address can't have a quote, but a sheet name can. Can a workbook name have it? Probably. Application username. The way I'm pulling the username in here, yeah, because presumably it could be, someone with an apostrophe in their name. So I'll prep that one as well. All right. So now, of course, if I make a change on this sheet, it should go through just fine because it's now dealing with the single quote in the sheet name. But now let's do this. Now let's say, if this is a zero-length string, I don't want it to be a zero-length string. I want it to send back null. So I think I'm going to want to look at what I'm returning a couple different ways. So let me declare something just called return. Let's just call it the value. So, whoops, dim the value as string. Then the value is going to equal what gets whatever, once I've replaced the zero lengths, once I've replaced the quotes with quotes. Now at this point, I'm going to say if the value is a zero-length string, or if the length of it is equal to 0, that might be a little more readable. So if the length is 0, then the value is equal to null. And then we'll just send the value back. So we're doing a couple of things now with the value. I think I want to do this a little bit differently. Let me just move this up above checking for the single quotes. I'm going to say, listen, when I first come into this, let's check to see if the data that's coming in has no length. Then we'll do something. And I think, and I want to treat that as a special case. If that's the case, I want to set prep value equal to null and be done. I like that better. So if you sent me down nothing, I'm sending back null. End of story. Otherwise, we're going to replace single quotes and send them back. And we're not quite there yet. Let's see what this records now if I bring in here something that has no value. So, how can I write a formula that returns blank? Well, I could just say equals quote, quote. That would definitely return blank. That should be exit function. Now let's look at, let me do that one more time. I'm going to get a clean print of my query. And what we're going to see is that the way this query got built it's returning null inside of single quotes. So what did that actually insert? Yeah, it actually wrote the characters NULL in there. I told it to insert the string literal NULL. What I've got to get is I've got to get that to be there without the quotes. That's got to be like that. Oof. So let's do this. Let's come to where we're doing this. I think the problem is that we've got quotes around, like the quotes they're not being dealt with here. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to take all the quotes off of here. In fact, I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to leave them on for my address. But I'm going to take the rest of them off because the rest of them I'm pushing through this prep SQL function. And I'm going to have that prep SQL function return the quotes or not return the quotes as appropriate. Oops. Address is going to keep the quotes. Okay. So now I'm going to do this. We've done the replacing here. Then let's just say this. Let's say if the value is a number, because if it's a number, I don't want to put the quotes on it. It's just going to be numeric, literal, no quotes involved. So if is numeric, actually, if not is numeric, so if it's not a number, if not is numeric, the value. Then let's put some quotes on. So let's do it with char 39. So I'm going to change the value to be character number 39 plus what it currently is, plus character number 39. So because numbers, numeric literals don't need the quotes on them, I'm not going to put the quote on it if it's a number. If it's not a number, that means it's got to be a string. I'll put the quotes on. I'm always going to have quotes on the address because I'm not running prep SQL on my address. It has to be a string. So I'll put some comments in here. Return null if null value is sent. This one is replace. Oh, I've got that quote separated from where it belongs. Add quotes if it's non-numeric. And then return the value. All right, so now I'm going to edit that again, that cell that had the formula in it that returns a zero-length string. Execute it. It looks like it executes okay. I'll refresh this. And we can see that it executed. Make sure I've got a clean print here. We can see that it formulated it now without the quotes. Everything else does have the quotes on it. And now that's going in really with the absence of a value here. So F5 should bring those in as well. You just go ahead and push this back over to where we've got the other example data. I'm going to run this, but push it to the SQL or to the SQL server in the cloud. And don't need to insert anything here. And we should be getting those where it's null. And there's the one that I just put in. Coming off of sheet apostrophe 3. Sheet apostrophe 3. Okay, so I think that's done a pretty good job of kind of reading those values off the worksheet and dealing with the two major issues, single quote and the absence of a value. And you'll need to deal with both of those in the database project. So when you're doing that database project, you might think the place to start is right here on this video. So this example, you definitely are going to need the code that's here to do that, but it's probably not the place to start. The place to start is to see if I can find where it was. Let me go back to our working with built-in file dialogues. The example from working with built-in file dialogues, this is the one where we kind of set up the structure to say, let's go read all the files out of this directory and then process them one by one. So if I were starting the database modification project, I'd probably start with the example that we did here and then integrate the code that we just did here to be able to work on executing those queries. When your code runs successfully on that project, you are going to execute something like 5,000 insert statements. So you're reading a bunch of data off of the worksheet and you're inserting into a database one after another. So you've got to write code that kind of looks across the database and figures out how to formulate each insert statement and then run across there and do it. Questions? Yes. Let me run it again so we get a clean read on it. Let me just make sure that if I bring back a formula that gives me a number, that this thing still works. This equals 3 plus 1. Yeah, looks like that's going okay too. And we should see that on that one, that 4 does not have quotes around it because it's numeric, and numeric literals in structured query language don't need the quotes. Wouldn't be the end of the world if I put the quotes on it. For most database management systems, it wouldn't be the end of the world if I put the quotes on it because it will do some type conversion. Like it's trying to go into this column, it's only numeric. I gave it a string that can convert to a number. Almost every relational database management system will do that conversion for you. But this is the cleaner way to do it. Should not be quotes on numeric literals. Okay, I guess that's it then for today. Have a good evening. I will see you on, what is today? Today's Monday. I'll see you on Wednesday. Class dismissed.